Hello, everyone, and welcome back, as it were, for those of you that were here earlier for my first attempt at this. I think I have figured out if the tip I found is accurate. I figured out how to have the audio actually stream for the video. The trick, apparently, is you have to have the video playing through a tab in Chrome. But we'll find out if that's true. Regardless, hope everyone is having a good Sunday morning. Thank you for joining me if you're here live. If you're listening later, do appreciate it. Hope this is interesting. Granted that it works. We'll find that out shortly. But before we get there, I'd like to say hello again to everyone who's shown up in the chat. Torcular Herophilus, hello. Zombie Teddy, hello. Ex-Bubba Hotep, hello. Re-Terrapin, hello. Chapin Cap, hello. Chicago Mike, hello. Disturbing Zen, hello. The Original Shroom, hello. Green Thunder Demighty, hello. So for those of you that watched my most recent video, you'll know it is a panel discussion about diversity in business from some diversity and inclusion executives or leaders, that sort of thing. I've always found, and for those of you that are here now, that were here earlier, this is going to be repetitious, but that's just the nature of things. The reason I do or find myself doing so many videos about diversity and inclusion in business or in schools, that sort of thing, is because almost to a one, every definition of what diversity and inclusion, air quotes included, means person to person, business to business, situation to situation is different. It's a different perspective on it, or whatever the definition is so amorphous that it could mean anything. So I'm never 100% sure what exactly the role of diversity and inclusion executives are from organization to organization, because it's always something different. The other thing is just when they do talk about what it is they do, and especially how they do whatever it is they do, I always find one of two things, sometimes mixed, but usually not. Either they couch their language in such a way that you're never really sure what they're saying, or they're so blatantly frank about the fact that what they inject into their hiring and promotion processes, I should say, is actual discrimination by race, by gender, by orientation. They say they want to reach a particular percentage of this number of kinds of people in their executive board or in their employee makeup or something. And somehow that's not them saying, we have a quota, we have a filter by which we are hiring or promoting people into specific areas of our company. And with that, I always wonder, and have wondered for a couple of years now, how that is not an inherent admission of actively violating civil rights laws when it comes to discrimination in the workplace and equal employment opportunity laws and things like that. I don't expect that these questions will ever be really answered because this stuff just keeps going and going and going. The number of consultants, the number of diversity and inclusion executive positions or employee resource groups and all that kind of stuff just grows and grows. And it seems to be just common accepted practice now. Now, there are arguments, and I've heard one of them in my previous video you may have seen, where someone who is in charge of diversity and inclusion seemingly actually abides by what those words truly mean when it comes to opening up the field for everyone to have an opportunity. Equal opportunity, not equality of outcome. Regardless, in the course of doing my previous video, I came across another panel discussion, one with a larger group from various different companies in different industries, which is always interesting to see how they define diversity and inclusion. And I thought instead of trying to do a video out of it, because making videos out of this kind of stuff, if you haven't noticed, or maybe you haven't, it's kind of a slog, mentally, time-wise, etc. And while I have, obviously, at this point, a very high tolerance for it, sometimes I just want to go, maybe not. But as an experiment, I thought I would attempt, again, to live stream a live commentary of a panel discussion. Now, I've only seen the first few minutes of this, enough to know that it caught my interest. Now, the whole video is about 40 minutes long. Adding my commentary, if I did the whole thing, this could turn into a 2-hour bonanza. I don't know if I will do that or not. I will do as much as I can stand, or at least up until a point where I'm getting bored, because I don't want to bore you, and I obviously don't want to bore myself. So this might be long, this might be short in relative terms. We'll find out. But before I begin my second attempt, a few more hellos before we move on. The Cape Crusader, hello. Decode, hello. Chuckles, hello. And Scrappy Rutro. All right, now, as before, I'm going to play the first 15 some odd seconds of the video. So I'm going to need you guys to tell me in the chat if you hear the audio. Because if you don't, then again, this will be a very short broadcast and I won't save it. So let's find out. You guys ready? Let me know if you hear this.
So I'll start by briefly introducing everyone. Down at the end, we have Molly Ford from Salesforce. She's the Senior Director of Global Equality. Then we've got Michelle Nyrop, who's the Senior VP of Human Resources at Gap Inc. We've got Rachel Ernst, VP of Employee Success at Reflective. Tyler Muse, founder and CEO of Lingo Live. And Phyllis James, Chief Diversity and CSR Officer at MGM.
Okay, everybody's saying they can hear the audio. So there's the introductions of all of our panelists. And I just want to point out that the one male on the stage is manspreading, which obviously denotes him as an agent of the patriarchy, just to get that out of the way. Thank you, ex-Bubba Hotep. Success, yes. So now that I know I can do this, maybe I'll do similar things in the future. But let's see. So who did we have again, just for my edification? We have representatives from Salesforce, Banana Republic, and The Gap, Reflective, Lingo Live, MGM, and Time Magazine is the moderator. And we're going to be talking about innovation and diversity hiring. Now, hiring is very explicitly the mechanism in these things that I'm most interested in. Because when you talk about diversity and hiring, what your definition of diversity is very important. If you define diversity as, and I'm just going to throw this out there, anything other than someone who is straight, anything other than someone who is white, and anything other than someone who is male, then you are putting either race, gender, or orientation as forefront filters in who you will hire or who you will target for recruitment, etc. And again, I just want to reiterate, I am not a lawyer. I am not a civil rights expert. For all I know, somewhere, somehow, this is legit. This kind of thinking and the policies in place to enact such things are not violations of equal employment law. Except to this point, I have yet to have anyone explain to me how it isn't, given the relatively constraining nature of the legal language around what counts as employment discrimination. But all that aside, I'll jump ahead here just a bit. We might have a repetition, but all right, let's see what they have to say.
At Gap Inc. We've got Rachel Ernst, VP of Employee Success at Reflective. Tyler Muse, founder and CEO of Lingo Live. And Phyllis James, Chief Diversity and CSR Officer at MGM. So a wide variety of both industries and sizes of companies represented. And feel free when you all, answer your questions, if you want to talk a little bit, especially those companies that might be less familiar about what you do, feel free to do that.
Yes, for all you little companies that nobody's ever heard of before, feel free to tell us who you are and why we should care. Yeah. But the thing that I am appreciative of is that we do have 5 different people from various industries, which is something I always look for when I do a panel discussion, commentary, or something, because, like I say, I'm most curious to know organization to organization, executive to executive, person to person, how they define diversity and inclusion. Because you would think, and again, I know I'm being maybe idealistic. You would think there would be some kind of standard definition in the course of business as to what that means. Because when you hire somebody to be your diversity and inclusion executive or leader, their job description should be easy to understand from one company to the next, even if there are slight variations, because it's just about having a multitude of people, right? And this is where I'd insert a Cenk Uygur saying right. So I'm going to try to, just to avoid any notion. And by the way, this is a transformative work of commentary and criticism. So on the off chance that anybody is reviewing this in the future, wondering whether or not I'm breaking any fair use policies, I don't think anyone could mistake this for the original work or think that I'm not changing it in some fashion with my commentaries, etc. So let's continue.
So we're talking about diversity and inclusion, which is something that's been talked about on a lot of panels for
Yeah, I should know. I've done videos on most of them.
the last several years. It's been talked about in the media a ton. I've been part of that myself. And what I wanted to start with was, why do you think, despite all the increased attention this issue is getting, that these diversity gaps are so persistent? Why do we still see them across industries?
Because people have the ability to make their own choices, and ultimately a company has to look at who has the merit to work at their company and not just whether or not they have the right look for PR purposes. Because the bottom line is still the bottom line. And especially if you hire people not on the basis of their skills and ability, but on the optics, if they don't have the skills and ability to actually do the job or be retained in their job, you're going to have a lot of turnover. So hiring on the basis of arbitrary characteristics does not make a good business sense in the long run. That's my theory.
And anyone feel free to jump in here.
Well, I'll jump in first. And I'm with MGM Resorts International. Sometimes people confuse that with the MGM studio down in Los Angeles.
Okay, so you're a sort of hospitality situation. I thought it was MGM, like the movies or something, but okay, we're talking about basically like resorts and hotels. Okay.
We actually own a series of entertainment and hospitality resorts based in Las Vegas, but we also are operating in several other venues around the country. And we've been in the diversity and inclusion developmental stage, and I'll call it developmental because it is evolutionary. I don't know that there is a final end point or that there should ever be a final end point.
Yeah, because if there was a final end point, then your career would conceivably come to a halt. And isn't it always convenient that the war that you're fighting, if never defined, will never end? I don't know how attractive a notion that is, especially in business. If it's like, if this is a problem that can never be solved, we're going to be throwing a lot of money at it for a very long time. So if you can't find a policy or a process over the course of years to solve a particular problem, but you keep plugging away at it, tell me again, what is the definition of insanity?
Given that human beings are continuously evolving. But I think one reason why this is such a persistent issue is because when companies have typically approached it, they've treated it like a one-off program where you can have a series of trainings and then everybody goes back to their workplaces and nobody really pursues things until the next training. And that really does not work. The most successful initiatives really have to be considered multidimensional and evolutionary.
Okay, I have no idea what that means, but you just told us that the problem will never be solved or can't be solved. So how can you say that there's a policy that is successful? I mean, success would mean you've solved the problem. So how do you define success? I know I may be asking rhetorical questions. I have no idea what they're going to say because unlike one of my other videos, at least usually, I haven't actually watched this all the way through. Although, truth be told, with a lot of my other videos, I'm scripting them live. So sometimes when I ask a question that you hear me in one of my videos, I actually have no idea what they're going to say next. In this instance, it's actually the case.
And so the approach has to be from a values or a standpoint. It has to be from a development of a diverse and inclusive culture standpoint, and then integrating diversity into business operations. All of those things have to happen.
There are several things I want to follow up on there.
Yeah, there's several things I want to follow up on there. The fact that she spoke a lot of words, but said absolutely nothing. But that's also very common.
Before we do, anyone else want to jump in with that on that question of why you think that these gaps can be so hard to close?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Again, I'm Rachel. I work at Reflective, and we're a strategic people management suite. So we have goals and employee surveys, check-ins, things like that. And when I think of any just general challenge in the HR industry that we face, I think about it as being driven in the decisions that happen on a daily basis from us or our leaders and our employees. And similar to Phyllis, I think it's not just even just one initiative. It's thinking about what's driving the things we decide to do every day and the comments we make every day.
Uh-oh, the comments we make every day? Are we heading into microaggression territory?
And it takes a lot of education to understand these biases. I'm sure we're going to get into this unconscious bias idea.
Oh, unconscious bias. I feel like I should have like a bingo thing, like donut operator or something, but maybe that'll be something for the future.
But I think it starts with what's driving me to decide the things I do. How do I change that? And am I willing to take the time to do that? And in the organizations I've worked at, a lot of times it's not high enough priority, right?
Right. Sorry. I've also given myself a complex when I watch videos like this, or just in general, when someone asks a rhetorical right in the middle of a conversation or presentation, my mind immediately inserts that clip of Cenk Uygur going, right? So if I'm understanding her correctly, it's important that everyone acknowledge that they are sexist, racist, biased, etc. every day and try to cure themselves of that, I guess.
And it's hard to know how to measure the value that it brings to the organization. So I think it's time and understanding what's driving the decisions we make and being open to changing it, because it can be, it doesn't feel great to be told, oh, you know what, that's actually a bias that you have there. How do you manage that?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you manage being accused of, name your biased evil word? How do you manage that? Especially if there was no notion in your head to be such or to act in such a way. How do you handle false accusation or accusation at all at work of being a horrible person?
Do you all feel, I know you can only really speak for your own companies, but is it your impression that we're at a point where there's wide recognition that diversity is important, not just for moral reasons, but for business reasons, and that companies are really trying to do everything they can? Or is there a lot of lip service being paid to this issue because companies feel obligated to do it, so they do an unconscious bias training and send everybody home?
Well, okay, I've had this theory for a long time, is that part of the utility of having a diversity and inclusion initiative in your company, whether it is well defined or whether it actually does anything, acts as litigation insulation. If you have a charge by a former or unhired employee that your company did not hire them or acted against them, let's say in firing them or whatever, due to sexism, racism, etc., having a pre-established diversity and inclusion philosophy, initiative, department, etc., insulates companies from those accusations. It doesn't indemnify them from such accusations legally, or make it that no such claim can ever be settled in favor of the complainant, but just that they have that extra arrow in their quiver against such accusations. So while it might be also good PR, I'm not 100% sure it's not also just pragmatically reasonable to have that there as a little pin on their lapel in case they get accused of something.
I would say, Michelle, from GAPA Inc., and I would say, I do believe that there's an imperative and that people understand it. I think for us, and it goes back to, I think, Phyllis, what you said, which is what we have to look at is every single day, what's the culture of the organization? Because I think, yes, there's a belief at all levels in our organization for certain, of the business and people imperative of diversity. What that means, though, in terms of behavioral changes that are required every single day from every single leader.
Behavior modification in the leadership level on downward. And I'm curious to know who decides what is correct behavior.
And so culture becomes the most important thing, and not the thing that you declare, you put on your website, but the experience that every single employee has every single day. And getting to that and the level of accountability required to get at that, it's a long, hard road. Without fixing that, all the other things are going to continue to fall short.
Yeah,
Well, I just take issue with that. I don't think all managers agree that there is a business imperative that drives diversity. I have found.
Yeah, because it's hard to make the argument that we're going to focus on arbitrary characteristics of potential hires or promotions rather than seeing, does this person bring value to the company or value to the position or value to the group? But I have a feeling that's not what our speaker actually means as far as managers not agreeing.
Found that, and I've been working in this area for almost 20 years now, I constantly have to explain and reinforce, why is this important for the business of our company? Why is it necessary to drive employee engagement? Why is it necessary to serve our customer markets? And
you've been doing this for 20 years and you still don't have an effective argument. You can't point to the bottom line and say, here's where we were doing this, and here's where we weren't doing this, and here's how the company can prosper by doing this. And because I hate to tell you, and it is a sad truth, companies as entities don't care about your feelings. They care about the bottom line. They care about, does this make a profit for the shareholders or doesn't it? If you cannot articulate a clear argument that doing something is beneficial to the company in the long run, then usually it's going to die on the vine. And she says she's been doing this for 20 years and constantly having to make the argument over and over and over again. And again, what is the definition of insanity?
so I know that we want to think the best of everyone, but everybody does not accept that basic premise.
Not everyone is believing in the good word. Well, that is terrible.
which is why we're having panels like this one and
That's right.
talking about these issues. Let's get into some of that concrete stuff that this is hard to do. Maybe Molly and Tyler, you want to jump in here. How do you start by defining diversity and inclusion? What does that mean at your companies?
Okay, this is good. Let's see. So she's asked the explicit question, how do you define it? this is where I get interested in discussions like this, because this is where the rubber meets the road, more or less. Now, the question is, will they actually answer that question? Or will they find their own various ways to dance around the issue and couch their language? Could go either way. I have seen both, depending on the individual.
I just want to make sure I understood the first question, which is why these issues exist, why there is a lack of diversity within workforces.
Not how we came to be here, not like we could spend all day getting into the pipeline issues and everything else. More, even as attention has been being paid, why is some golden solution not fix this problem in recent years?
But I think you have to address the pipeline issues. I think you have to address some of the systemic challenges that have led to, the lack of opportunities for people of color, the discrimination that exists, some of the major challenges that put you in a position where you even have to start having some of these conversations.
Sure. Okay, well, do tell us what kind of pipeline discrimination exists in your company then? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, and otherwise you wouldn't have the job you have. So I'm curious to find out how evil your company has been in the past and how you're so much better now, I guess.
Because if you don't recognize that, if you don't create a space within your company to really acknowledge what's happening outside of these four walls and what the bigger picture is and the injustice associated with that, then it's really hard, I think, for people to feel like you get it as an organization, which of course you don't. You're constantly trying to make sense of it, but that...
Wait, so you'll never understand the reasons why things are the way they are, and yet you're the guy in charge of solving the problem. Is that what I'm supposed to understand?
You want to create a space where people can talk about that. So I think you define it through the culture and how people talk about some of these issues.
Okay, I'm sorry for jumping in again, but I hear this all the time from diversity and inclusion executives. When they're asked, how do you define diversity and inclusion? More often than not, they will say something to the effect of, you have to go to the employees and ask them, how do you define it? As though the person being given the job of being an executive over diversity and inclusion has no idea what it is that their job is meant to do. They have to go ask the employees to tell them what they should be doing to address diversity and inclusion. Now, I guess you could argue, well, every company's different. Every company culture is different. You don't necessarily know what the problems are unless you go to the subject matter experts, the people on the ground. I can get that to a certain extent. However, we're talking about diversity and inclusion, right? I mean, if these are the criteria by which you're going to measure the success of your company, it should be pretty obvious. Is your company diverse? Well, how do you define diverse? If it's going to be anything other than diversity of thought or diversity of merit, I don't know that you have a whole lot of other options to examine when it comes to the makeup of your workforce. Thank you, Dark Shade. Is that a white man on the panel mansplaining? Well, not only is he mansplaining, he's also manspreading, if you'll notice. Again, a very clear sign that he's an agent of the patriarchy.
Read the story about, Accenture does a really cool program, and I think
Accenture? Hey, that was the one video I did where the guy said flat out that they were being sexist and discriminatory in their hiring practices because he was talking to an audience of people from, I think, Germany or the Netherlands or something, and he seemed to be afraid that using any kind of idioms or metaphors that Americans might understand wouldn't come across the translation, so he was very blunt. I'm glad to hear that Accenture is still part of the process.
LinkedIn does this as well, where they do all hands on sensitive topics. So they'll have employees submit topics of things that are happening outside of work that are really causing conflict for them. You can take a day off because you're sick, but can you take a day off because of the race relation stuff that's happening in your neighborhood?
I don't know. Can you take a day off because of social issues in your neighborhood? I don't know if that's a standard most companies accept. I don't even know if that's an excuse an employee would actually cite out loud as for why they're taking a day off of work, but I don't know. I guess we'll find out, maybe.
Can you even talk about that with employees? So Accenture and LinkedIn did this thing where they would talk about that. They'd have an employee come forward and talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and what an massive impact that was having on his life, and realize that there's actually a lot of other people in this organization that are facing this same struggle, the same challenge as me.
So they should all get extra days off of work?
I think what it also does is it educates people who don't understand it. It helps them actually empathize with what this person had to go through in their life, or what they're going through in their community outside of work, and how instrumental having somebody like that in the organization and the perspective they bring can be in our ability to succeed as an organization. So I think if you ignore the bigger picture, if you don't talk about it as a company, then you're going to be really limited in fostering that conversation about what diversity and inclusion really looks like.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to say that your real life circumstances or things going on in your life should not have or cannot have any effect on you when you go to work. However, there is a notion of professional distance between your personal life and the personal lives of your coworkers and doing your job. Now, every company's different. Every company might have a different culture or a different sort of ease of communication on those things, etc. But, and this is just me, when I come to work, save for things that are unavoidable, like a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment or some kind of family emergency, something that is just, can't do anything about, got to do it. My personal life stays on the other side of the front door until I leave work for the day, And that's not to say, if I get a text from somebody and I have to message them back, but insofar as it applies to my work ethic or my time at work or relating to my coworkers, my personal life is a separate aspect of my life from my working life. Again, I understand it depends on the situation, etc. But whatever activist group I might be a part of, or whatever movement I might feel myself tied to, I don't bring my politics into the office. I understand, depends on where you work. If you're working for a political activist organization, that's your bread and butter. Generally speaking, my personal issues aren't anybody else's problem, and I really should work to make sure that they are not, as much as is possible. Again, that's just me, maybe.
Interesting tension, because on the one hand, as you say, of course you have to acknowledge it, but you can also see companies that will say, oh, well, it's a pipeline issue. That's not really my problem. I can't fix that myself. And it can be used as a kind of scapegoating that you see. I don't know if that's something you all want to speak to, or Molly, any thoughts on these or the...
I think how, so I'm from Salesforce, and how we approach it, and we started our equality journey informally years ago, right? But really the Office of Equality 2 years ago, and I use my hand to make this example. We say, what are the practices that are already your company, and figure out how to add equality to those. So you're weaving in equality into how people do their day-to-day jobs from CEO down, right? So for my company, we're big on events. So when I show up to an event meeting or I'm talking to the leadership, I ask them, will there be pronoun buttons?
Okay. Okay. So weaving equality into everything that you're doing. Equality here defined as a social ideology, at least from my perspective. Although this executive seems to think that equality is just a plain fact that either you have it or you don't. And at least in this first blush, it is partially defined by having pronoun buttons at your event so that no one has to guess, I suppose, or risk offending anyone.
Is there a gender neutral bathroom?
Oh, I can't wait for this litany of extra things. Thank you, Snubberth. My workplace has pronoun buttons. It is a college. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'm just being too cynical. I don't know. Thank you, Xbugba Hotep. Did I miss something? Pronoun buttons? Is that what I heard? I'm assuming it's like either like a sticker or like an actual like metal button that says he, him, she, her, they, their, or something on it, so that as soon as you look at somebody, you know the correct way to address them. I'm assuming. I've never been to an event with pronoun buttons.
So you're making sure that things that your employees already do. So we already have an online learning platform where employees and customers go learn, okay, how do I add equality to that? Right? So we're
Right. Sorry, Cenk Uygur again.
looking for ways to really infuse it as part of the culture and the DNA of the company. And every year our CEO stands up and says, what are our 4 core values for the year? And then we get to debate about it, and it's democratized, and any employee can chime in online and say something. And we've said equality is a core value, right? And
right. Again, now I need you to define what you mean by equality, because it doesn't sound like equality is what it's supposed to mean. It sounds like you're pushing, again, a identity politics ideology, which does not inherently equate to equality.
And that gives us a North Star. That means no matter what happens with elections, no matter the news cycle, we know we should be acting in accordance with equality, right? And that really kind of helps us kind of set the stage. And you were starting to talk about the language, right?
Yeah.
In terms
Okay, I'm not going to do that every time, guys, I swear. It's like a nervous tick now. I can't help myself.
Of the definition and the language. And we've asked our employees, and I know it sounds cliche, but we call it a journey, right? Be on a journey for equality. And we say, as part of this journey, declare yourself as an ally. And we purposely didn't say men go be the ally to women or white people go be an ally to a Black person. We're not putting a cape on anybody, right?
Yeah, you're not putting a cape on anybody, but you're just putting the onus on whoever's in the room to assume that they need to be the ally. They need to help someone else on the basis of their race, their gender, their orientation, whatever the case may be, because we have to assume that anyone different from us in particular demographics is thus weaker than we are. And it's interesting that you said men to women, white to Black as your first examples.
Being an ally means you show up for people, and we made it actionable. Allies have 4 steps. You ask people about their journey, you listen with empathy, you show up. So when South Asia Force has a Diwali festival and you want to wear a sari, you sign up and learn the training and figure out what that means to that culture, that impact, and then you show up for them. And last but not least, we say speak up. So in this day and age of #MeToo, or someone says a racist joke, you're speaking up.
Okay, so I go to an event and I'm wearing cultural garb, not my own, and that's not cultural appropriation? I thought that was a bad thing. I thought, for me to be adopting anything that was created by anyone else is just a reflexive action of my colonialism inherent to my skin color. Anybody listening to this that thinks I'm making up that kind of sentiment, I'm not. These are things that I've been told over and over again from various sources. Okay.
Right, and it's really a journey that we're asking people to go on to really learn about equality, learn the vocabulary, act in a way.
Yeah, I want to come back to this idea. Those are really interesting examples that both seem, obviously like they should be part of this, but also hard to measure. How do you measure?
You say that, but when we told people don't be racist, that didn't work either, right? So you still have to tell people the behaviors you want them to act with, right?
Right. Don't be racist because you're assuming someone's going to be racist. Or alternately, you have decided to interpret something someone has done or said as racist and hold them to account for their unconscious bias, which they totally have, even if they don't know it, but you do because you can read their minds and their hearts. Got it.
Uh-huh.
Don't be a creepy bro. That didn't work either, right? So is you still have to tell people the behavior you need them to act in, right?
Absolutely. Let's keep going in this vein of any other thoughts to share on this idea of how you define diversity and inclusion, sort of what your goals are, particularly in terms of anything that you might be measuring. How do you break it down and say, okay, is it about the diversity of the talent pools for hiring? Is it more about a survey of employees of how included do you feel? How do you think about it, and how are you measuring whether you're succeeding or not on a year-to-year basis?
Okay, back to the actual question that matters. How do you define it? What are the metrics by which you say that you've succeeded or failed, etc.? This is where, again, hopefully, we'll get to it, the rubber meets the road, and they actually start telling us how they are filtering their hiring and promotion practices. Thank you, Ashar Vandale. My workplace is starting up a diversity and inclusion initiative. I've been told by a mentor that I will have to shine twice as bright to move up. Okay, well, I'm not going to say that working hard to stand out is inherently a bad thing, but I would be curious to know what exactly that initiative is going to do to diminish your standing. Because if there's something in the literature, and here's the thing, guys, my curiosity always comes down to what does it say in the manual? Okay, if a company has a policy of hiring people on the basis of XYZ, it's just a policy. And until you can actually have some literature that says, we need to, by company fiat, get X% of this kind of person into the C-suite by this timestamp or something. That's where I'm really curious to know why or how often there are any lawsuits or questions or investigations started regarding equal employment opportunity laws. Because if a company explicitly puts into its paperwork, into its hiring manuals, etc., discrimination, we need to have this percentage of this race or this percentage of this orientation or this percentage of this gender, then they are explicitly discriminating on the basis of these things in their hiring or promotion practices, which is, as far as I can tell, illegal. So, and thank you, Dark Shade. Define creepy bro. Yeah, there are bad behaviors that they will define for you and tell you if you are enacting, and then censure you for it.
Yeah, in my mind, if diversity is working, people are experiencing the work environment in similar ways. And we just did our first employee survey. We're about 220 people, so we're smaller. And when I looked at the data, I cut it by different demographics, right? And one of the things we saw is women are experiencing the workforce differently than men. Not surprising.
Yeah, that's not surprising at all. I'm curious to know why you think it's not surprising.
Right, and then where specifically is that happening? And it's happening with career growth and leadership. And we just did a whole bunch of focus groups to understand what specifically are you experiencing that's different than perhaps your male counterparts. So we're going to choose a few questions, and we're going to measure that and survey every 4 months.
Is there an example of something they said that you recall?
Well, one of the things that I'm sure we all experience, there are mainly men on our leadership team. And so.
Oh no. And that's a bad thing? Because the tone of voice you had just there sounded like the fact that they are men is inherently a negative. Oh, well, I'm interrupting.
When women look up and they see mainly men, they usually think, well, I can't see myself in that position, and because I can't model myself after somebody, then I assume that I have limited career growth because it's mainly men who've made it that far.
Okay, so women are unable to have male role models or just professional role models who are men. If a woman cannot see another woman in a particular position, then she can never imagine that she can be in that position. So Hillary Clinton didn't actually run for president. Got it.
And you hear that in a lot of different, in the Lean In survey, various surveys as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we have to approach D&I from a number of different standpoints all at the same time.
Ooh, sort of like intersectionality.
So it is as much who are the representational models at all levels of leadership in your organization.
Representational models? Okay.
And if that is not diverse at all levels, then the organization really needs to address that.
Okay, so representative models at all levels. I'm not quite sure what that means, but if these outstanding individuals in your company at various levels are not quote unquote diverse, then the company needs to address that. Okay, well, again, define diversity and you will lead us towards what you mean when you say addressing that. And then my question is, as it always has been, does addressing that mean filtering out by race, gender, orientation, etc.?
Because I do think those are false paradigms when you have all men at the top and women sprinkled in at various lower levels. And so you do have to address the pipeline issue. But at the same time, you
How? I suppose I shouldn't be amazed anymore, but I'm always amazed how someone will say, you have to do XYZ to achieve the goal. How? We want to reduce carbon emissions by 100% in 10 years. And that's what we're going to do. How? I'm going to make everybody have free college. How? Never explain. Always give the end goal, but never get into the details. And in this instance, these guys really need to get into the details because they have opened the door, as I've repeated over and over again, for questions about their hiring practices and discrimination in employment.
You have to address the daily experience of every employee, regardless of what level they're at and what their work is.
You can't do that. Okay, you cannot. In an organization as large as I am sure MGM Hospitality is, you cannot see that every employee every day is experiencing the work the way you want them to, or thinking the way you want them to. You set a job description, you set expectations for their performance in that job, and you keep those things in relative terms on even keel, similar job to similar job. Either they are performing their job or they are not. If there's some problem, personality conflict or otherwise, with an individual, or there seems to be something going on within a particular department or something, certainly you have an HR department for that. You have a process of complaint for that. But every individual employee, every day that their experience is X, Y, or Z, I can't even imagine how insane someone would go if they actually tried to accomplish that. Thank you, Ex-Bubba Hotep. We need to fix the problem. How? By fixing the problem. How? By fixing the problem, etc. Yeah, it's this endless regression of just, there's a problem, and what you have to do is you have to address that problem. Okay, executive, multi-decades or several years professional in the position that's meant to solve that problem. How do you solve it?
Because inclusion has to be a part of the daily experience. And we try to measure that through our annual employee opinion surveys. We have 80,000 employees, so we don't do them once a quarter, we do it once a year.
Wait, you do a survey once a year for 80,000 employees? But how do you know on a day-to-day basis the experience of each employee, which is the standard that you just set? Okay.
And we ask questions. We have a D&I index, a series of questions on the survey that go to measure how does your individual team leader or manager treat you and others in your workplace on a daily basis. And
because there's an assumption that team leaders are not doing the good thing, I guess. I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, employee surveys and confidential reviews of things are completely acceptable. I don't have a problem with that. It just sounds like there's a foregone conclusion that there will be problems, and the questions are targeted at, you know, an assumption that the management might be doing something wrong. I don't know if that's the case. I haven't seen the employee survey they're talking about, but you know, that's just the reflex I get.
And to me, that's where inclusion, or where the rubber meets the road.
Hey, that's my phrase.
Because it doesn't matter how many platitudes or, you know, slogans companies give lip service to, if it's not really lived in the daily workplace of the organization.
Okay, and you still haven't defined a thing. Not a single thing.
I think that's kind of what I was hitting on, is how you define it depends a lot on the culture and how the people internally define it. So one of the
No. Okay. You know, treatment of management to employees, that's been part of the equation of business since time immemorial. You guys are talking about diversity and inclusion, two very specific words that seemingly or presumably have a very specific outcome. It doesn't depend on the culture. All right? I mean, if you have an issue in the company, like some kind of attitude or something towards one group or another, yeah, that's a problem. That's got nothing to do with diversity and not necessarily inclusion. You guys need to define your terms, okay? Because we don't know what you're talking about. No idea at all.
The tools that we use, you know, quite as many employees as you do, but every employee uses Slack. And we use this Slack bot called Allie, A-L-L-I-E.
A-L-L. Oh, I did a video about a Slack bot called Crescendo not too long ago. I wonder if this is similar.
Which sends survey questions out to the employee base periodically on things like, it's all diversity and inclusion related. So unconscious bias, walks through, it'll take like 3 minutes to complete a survey, and it happens probably twice a month. And so over time, our people ops team is collecting all this data and then going back to the company and saying, this is how people feel. When these questions were asked, this is the color at Lingo Live of how we define what unconscious bias looks like here, or how we define the issues that exist within the leadership team. This is specifically what we're not doing well and things that we are doing well.
Okay. Let's try to figure this out here. All right. So separating the two words out for a moment. Inclusion. If inclusion is defined as everyone has the ability to give feedback to the company on what's going on in the company, etc. That sounds like what they're talking about. Okay. If that's it, if you're going to touch base with the employees on a periodic basis to see what's going on with the company, again, that's nothing innovative. That's nothing new. That's happened in just about every business or job I've ever had. But driving in a specific ideology of unconscious bias into your Slack surveys, I wonder if Ally or whatever it is the same as Crescendo. I should bring up that video again sometime. Anyway, look up on my channel. I think it's called like Rise of the Woke Bot or something like that, and it talks about this.
Interesting. Are there, not to put you on the spot, but any example you recall from that where you saw, oh, here's an issue and we're going to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest, and you know, obviously I'm the poster child for this, is what you just mentioned. So, you know, men at the top. So,
well, then you should quit. I mean, that seems like the simplest solution to the problem. You are the problem. You're at the top, presumably, of whatever you're doing. So quit.
We have an executive team of 5 people, only one of which is a female. So that we got called out for that. We're a very transparent culture. I know Everlane, she said the same thing. We do the same thing. We walk through our board decks with the whole company. And we poll them on what your biggest grievances are. And this actually came outside of Allie. This was like one of the biggest grievances and the things that they wanted us to focus on.
Focus on the makeup of gender in your company, regardless of merit. Got it.
And that was one of the pieces. We have a very diverse workforce. We even have it at the management team level. But then once you get above management at the leadership level, there's this drop off. And I wish I had an answer for that. We've been trying to work through that. And that's part of the reason I'm here, is to kind of learn from others and figure out how to work past these issues. But that's one thing that we acknowledged instead of kind of hiding behind and said, look, this is something we know is an issue and here's our plan.
Okay, well, if the issue is there's too many men in leadership versus women, the answer is, my friend, quit and bring in a successor that is a woman. Because if gender is the only metric by which you're going to measure success in your diversity and inclusion initiatives, then you have to discriminate by gender. Is that what you are saying you guys are working on? I legitimately would like to know an answer to that question.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump into the fact that you would acknowledge that. So when I went through employee survey results, we were very transparent. Like, look, there is this gap, and this is where it exists, and this is what we're gonna do. And it was the highest rated all hands meeting that we had ever had, because they're experiencing it themselves, and they just want to know, we see that this is an issue, and being fully open with the data was a huge win for us.
Okay, and we will come back to that issue of transparency.
Yeah.
One issue that's clearly coming up here is differences in approaching this at different scales. So I wonder if you all can talk about that. If you're already, people here are working at a company that does have 10,000 or 15,000 or more employees, how do you approach perhaps being corrective versus at a company that's newer and starting out, you have a couple hundred employees and you've got more of an opportunity, as they were saying on the last panel, to be like, okay, we're going to get this right from day one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Get what right? You still haven't defined terms. And I'm becoming less and less surprised over time, the more I see these videos, how often they never define their terms. Or if they do, their definitions are so amorphous that they basically belie actually counting as a definition.
I like what you did there. When we talk about that from a Salesforce standpoint, we've really been pretty transparent in our equal pay audit.
Yeah.
And trust me, we're not bragging and there's no yay, it's equal pay day thing happening at Salesforce, right? We recognize this is a problem, but we talk about this because we're noticing women bringing a gap with them throughout technology and 2 other companies.
Women bringing a gap with them? Are you acknowledging that women have an inherent detriment in the industry? Because that's what it sounded like you were saying.
And so our message really is, if you have a small company, you have a greater opportunity to start sooner, right? We
start sooner doing what? Specifically, doing what?
We have an audit where we're paying out $10 million now after 3-4 years of doing the assessment, and we have 35,000 employees. That's equal pay is something you can start with 500 employees and make a greater impact, right? And build it into your processes and systems from day one.
Yes, but not every employee does the same work. Not every employee has the same responsibilities. Not every employee has the same skills or talents as every other employee. Pay will be different, even in similar positions, based on work experience, based on bonuses, based on a whole slew of other factors. As long as the base pay for a starting out individual in a particular situation is equal, granted that the job description, expectations, and responsibilities are equal, that's the best you can do. But if someone's not going to grow in prosperity with conceivably the prosperity of the company for the time and effort they've put into the company, and they end up making more than someone else with the exact same job title and the exact same responsibilities who just started last week, there's always going to be a differential. Whether or not you find evidence that pay is being restricted or altered on the basis of something other than experience and other than skill and other than time and effort, that's when you have a case. But you have to prove that. And I'll tell you what, I'll bet you dollars to donuts, no pun intended, but I'll take it, that even a company that explicitly says we will have equal pay at some point is going to have a complaint about there being unequal pay. I almost guarantee it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I did
Yeah,
that.
very nice.
Yeah.
Way to bring it back.
Yeah,
Michelle?
I was going to say, being
Yeah.
a company of over 100,000 employees and 50 years of history, some of which is amazing, right? When you think about the gender gap, that is not a place of an issue. We don't have the same issues. Our board, our senior leadership team, it's pretty 50-50 at our leadership team.
Wait, pretty 50-50? Okay, so was there an explicit initiative to make your leadership 50-50 men and women? Were you discriminating against men and or women, depending on the circumstances, to maintain this pretty 50-50 ratio? I'd be really curious to know the answer to that question.
Most of our brand presidents are women, our CFO, our CTO, our CIO. So that is a core strength of ours that we just can't take for granted and need to work on.
A core strength is putting women in positions because they're women. Okay.
On the flip side, for us, in particular in our product-facing functions, the people who make product for our customers, who are increasingly more diverse, we have serious challenges, not just from a pipeline perspective, but also just from a retention perspective. And so that's been a really big focus for us. And it's hard to do, in a big company, hire by hire. So where are there seismic opportunities to make a shift? For us, for Banana Republic, we moved our entire creative function from New York to San Francisco, which was 200 jobs.
Wait. Okay, so your customer base is changing. The people creating your products is not changing, but you're having problems with retention of the people that you want there to reflect your customer base. Why are you having problems with retention? And if you're moving an entire department or whatever from New York to the other side of the country, did you bring all 200 people with you from one place to another? Because a lot of times I've seen in companies where they move entire departments geographically other places, they essentially just fire everybody in the one place and rehire everybody in the other. Or they have people from the one place go and train up the new group of people, essentially training their replacements before they get fired. I know that's a tangent issue. It's just what came to mind from my own experience. And my own experience, is very valuable as an employee to employee, anyway.
In product functions. So it became a mission for us to say, this is a place, right, where we can start a cycle of something that's different that can help for the entire organization.
So moving an entire department from New York to California was a reboot. You changed your entire, I assume you must have fired everybody from New York and rehired everybody from scratch in the new location in order that you could implement this initiative of whatever we're talking about now, equal pay or 50-50 hiring practices or something. Is that what we're talking about?
So we were incredibly purposeful in hiring as it relates to our product folks. But I think what we've found is that until we make product for everyone,
you cannot do that. There is no product for everyone.
We're not going to attract people who want to make product for us. And that has been a really big issue, right? Like, people who want to make product for us want to be able to make it for their families and their friends and be proud of it. And we were just not hitting the mark. And so we have a small but mighty group of people sort of deep in our organization that raised the challenge to our brand president, who said, you tell me what you need and go after it. And so they've grown from 1 or 2 merchants to about 30 people that have both sort of gone into all of our product milestones to make sure that from sketch and trend and concept through, all of our color palettes to size, all the way through, that they're inserting themselves in while they've gone back to all of our product training. So every piece of product training now they've gone through to say, how are we being more inclusive from the beginning? And so that team of people literally has probably drove more change in our corporation in the last year and a half than a whole lot of, D&I folks and HR folks and others have, because literally from the inside out, they're holding a mirror up to us and they're helping us to solve those problems. And
Okay. And what if those products don't sell? What if they're not popular? What if you've gone to all this effort to have your employees design products for themselves, inserting themselves into the products, and there's no market for those things? That the wider audience of your customer base doesn't care for them. Is that a failure of the customer base? Or is that a failure of you to understand the market you're working within? I know I'm talking in hypotheticals, but I'm just curious.
little by little, we're hoping that will change the product engine, which will then help us to serve our community customers better and start the cycle over for us.
So that really does point up something that I think is truly critical about the success of D&I initiatives in companies.
Okay, well, again, you have to define success, because to this point, you haven't defined exactly what diversity and inclusion actually mean as end goals.
And that is, it really has to be treated as a serious business imperative that has all of the complexity and dimensions of other business problems.
Okay, an imperative to what? Business problems like what? You need to define terms. All of you. I mean, if you have different ways of looking at it from your different companies, fine. Tell us what they are.
And I think you have to have an organized, well thought out business strategy so that you can say, I'm going to address pipeline issues through this series of measures. I'm going to address employee experience issues through this series of measures. And so, whereas the first would naturally focus on HR recruitment and retention practices, the second would focus on leadership behaviors, et cetera.
Yes, and are you going to tell us what the pipeline hiring HR mechanics are of this? I mean, or the internal stuff. Either way. I mean, the internal stuff so far has been, we're going to do frequent surveys of our employee base to try to understand what problems they see in the company that we can then address internally. Which again is not anything new or innovative, except that it seems to be the focus is mainly on a presumption that there is unconscious bias, harassment, discrimination within the company already, and we have to find it and stamp it out. I don't know if that's the case. I guess it's a company by company issue. But I'm more curious about the whole hiring part, because this presentation was labeled as a hiring thing. What mechanisms, what policies and processes do you use in your hiring decisions to encourage diversity and or inclusion? I would really, really appreciate specifics. And yet we're halfway through this presentation or this panel talk. And so far as I can tell, save for very, very cursory comments, no one has said anything definitive.
And what you just talked about is integrating inclusion into marketing and product operations. And so that is another dimension of D&I. How do you service your entire customer market base from start to finish? And that takes a whole different set of initiatives. And
like what?
What this really points up, which I think makes the real difference from organizations, and that is your diversity and inclusion team is there to be a catalyst for integrating diversity and inclusion into the core fabric of your culture and your business operations.
So the diversity and inclusion team are evangelists to the various aspects of your company to bring diversity and inclusion into the company where it already doesn't exist, I assume. Okay, so what are they bringing into the fabric? What goes into the secret sauce that you're then going to rub into the fabric?
They're not there to do a few programs now and then, but achieving meaningful and impactful inclusion is the responsibility of every different part of the organization.
Then why have a team of people called diversity and inclusion? I mean, if it's everyone's responsibility, then what is the point of having specific executives or a department overseeing it? I thought the employees had to tell the diversity and inclusion team what needs to be addressed in the company. So if the people who are the employees already know the problems needing to be addressed, why aren't they addressing them if they're responsible for the... I'm going to have an aneurysm.
Everybody doesn't have the same role in it, but everybody has a role. And part of what the D&I team does is to help everybody understand this is what your role is, and we're here to help you with tools so that you can maximize how you're executing your role.
Okay, and the employee role seems to be a survey taker. The diversity and inclusion team puts out surveys, gets data from the employees on their experiences, let's say, and then, I don't know, aggregates that information and gives a report to management. And then management has to decide how to address these problems if they can be addressed. So the diversity and inclusion team are just waiters taking orders and delivering them to the kitchen.
Interesting to think, both across teams and across industries, these different things that diversity can mean. We've talked about gender, you talk about race, it could also be size. Thinking about the size, if you're in clothing.
Well, okay, at least the moderator is starting to seemingly guide them towards defining what they're talking about. I can kind of appreciate that, since nobody here so far has said anything substantive. Irate Bear.
Of your customers, that's really a D&I question that also gets back to this issue of changing your business because of it. I would love to hear any other examples from you all of a process or a product or anything where you've said, okay, we increased the diversity of our teams, or we thought about that, or we saw an outcome that was different because we had diverse teams working on it. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yes. Can you please give us specific examples of how you performed these functions of your job and how the outcomes of your efforts actually changed something? Okay. Points to the moderator for trying, as best as she can, to guide them towards specifics, which in every instance thus far, they have very strangely avoided.
I don't want to talk too much.
Too late.
Okay. But I do have an example. 3 years ago in our company, we were trying to maximize profits.
Maximize profits in a company? You don't say.
Our margins were not where we wanted them to be. And so the question was, well, we all feel like we're working to peak capacity. How can we possibly do anything more? And so our leadership said, well, are we working as smart as we can work? We're probably working as hard as we can work. And so we set up a series of cross-disciplinary teams. And you might ask, well, why weren't you doing that before?
I was just about to ask, why weren't you doing that before? I was also about to ask, what does cross-training have to do with diversity and inclusion initiatives. I mean, unless you're going to define inclusion as everybody in the company has some knowledge of how each part of the company works, which if that's your notion, I can't say that that's necessarily a bad idea. I think it's valuable for everybody to have some idea of how the different varying parts of a company operate, just so they have some referential knowledge if a question comes up or if an idea occurs. But that's got nothing to do with gender or race or that the fact that there's too many men in management. Okay.
But, it's the way large organizations tend to work in silos. And it was really hurting the business. So achieving diversity of thought and perspective and truly sharing that around specific business problems or processes or practices really made a huge difference. And when everybody went into their work teams, there was no idea that was a bad idea. Everybody.
Okay, there are always bad ideas, or an idea that's not as efficient as another idea. If you're going to treat all ideas equally in a business, good, bad, or otherwise, and give them equal weight, I don't think that's very efficient. But again, backing up a second, she's talking about cross-training, talking about diversity of thought, or at least diversity of knowledge base within a company. And that's fine. That's, like she said, why weren't you doing this before? It's not innovative. It's not new. It is entirely useful. It's entirely productive, depending on the circumstances, that different parts of your company have an idea what the different parts do and how they operate or what they have to go through. Because if Department A only knows to send orders out to Department B without knowing what kind of stressors or mechanics Department B has to go to fulfill those orders, maybe Department A will find a different way to send out those orders or understand the time delay between sending out an order and getting a result. That's completely fine. But that's not what you guys have been talking about. You've been talking about pronouns and how there are too many men at the top or whatever. So are you retreating to something that everybody can understand and isn't controversial at all because you don't want to talk about what you really mean to talk about? Or is our speaker here on a completely different page than seemingly everybody else on the stage and even the moderator?
Eagerly sought just a new idea about how to do something. So to make a long story short,
too late.
Over the course of about 18 to 24 months, we were able to achieve $400 million in cost savings or new revenues by simply pooling the talent that we had and actually practicing what we had been mimicking, diversity of thought, which people were not practicing. But when they saw that they really started to do it, it paid off.
Okay, that's a great example, Tyler.
No, that's not a great example. That's not a great example of what this entire thing is about. That's got nothing to do with diversity and inclusion. That's got everything to do with maximizing efficiency between departments and increasing the knowledge base of your employees, which is something, like I say, is not innovative. And I have almost never heard that expressed as an outgrowth of diversity and inclusion. So I don't know. Was that a smokescreen? Or like I say, does our speaker here, sort of like Margie Lee Johnson in my previous video, does our speaker here exist in a plane outside the rest of the people on the stage? I'm confused.
I was gonna follow that, but now I'm like, wow, $400 million. That's amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing, given that it has nothing to do with the subject at hand. But okay.
It is.
I think one of the things that we did early on, so we're an online language coaching platform. We work with software engineers who are English as a second language, and they speak English, but they don't feel confident enough to really contribute their unique potential, which is our mission. So one of the things we recognized early on is we don't have anybody, yes, we can talk to users, but we don't have anybody in the company who really is a user for this. So our 4th and 5th engineers that we hired were actually people just like the folks who we help. And it changed completely the way that we're thinking about solving the problem.
So you hired people who are multilingual. You hired people on the basis of their skill set. I'm assuming, which is fine. What's that got to do with diversity and inclusion? And I know I'm being a little bit callous here, that's simply finding the right tool for the job. Okay.
Not just from a technical standpoint, literally from a product standpoint. So I would say, having somebody, it's enough to kind of train you from good design research to kind of empathize with your users, but you're never going to be at the level, especially if what you're helping them with is as nuanced as what we are, as you would if you actually come from that community or you live that experience on a daily basis. And so I would definitely advocate hire your users as people who build your company, and you will see a massive transformation.
Okay. On the surface, that sounds fine, but it doesn't have anything to do with the subject at hand. That's not diversity and inclusion. I mean, what if all of your users are male? What if you make a cologne for men? Then you should only hire men? Is that what we're supposed to be getting out of this? Because I remember somebody telling me that having too many men in leadership roles, etc., is inherently a bad thing. And that, I don't know, somebody on this stage is part of the problem.
Okay.
I can jump in on the hiring side
Sure.
too, since our diversity, a lot of that has come from just thinking about how we're scaling. So we're scaling very quickly. So what we did last quarter is we had our recruiters talk to the hiring managers that are hiring the largest amount of people, engineers and sales and customer success. And we asked them, when you think about adding to diversity in your team, what would that look like? Where do you need to round out your team more? And we got that definition from different hiring managers. And then we
Will you give us any of those definitions, please?
built out a sourcing tool. And we had a goal, like X% of candidates coming through the pipeline must be of that diversity.
Uh-huh.
And we started that in the beginning of this year, and half of our hires this past quarter were women. So we actually finally had 50-50.
Okay, so you created tools, like actual tools, with which to filter out candidates for hiring on the basis of gender. Got it.
From a diverse set of backgrounds. So we're really
No. Backgrounds are immaterial. You set the threshold at gender, first and foremost. You set up tools and processes specifically to hire people from specific demographics. You discriminated in your hiring practices on the basis of race and or gender and or orientation, but specifically and explicitly in this instance on gender. You said that. Okay.
proud of that. So you can actually see, once you start tracking, you can actually see the difference.
We're in just a minute, we're going to go to the audience for a few minutes of questions. So please be thinking about anything you'd like to ask our panelists. One thing I'd sort of rapid fire before we get to that I'd love to ask you all to share with people here is an example of two things. One, something that you tried in the past to try to work on these issues that didn't work as you'd hoped. And a tactic on the other side that you would share with people here, that if you were going to have them go away with one thing, you know, what is something they might do, or that something great that you wish you had done sooner? You know, what are some practical do's and don'ts you could share from your expertise? Molly, do you want to start?
Yes. Could you finally, maybe, probably not, give us some specifics on what you do, how you do your job, how you achieve the goals you want, or the attempts you've made that have not reached those goals and how those operated? Any bets on whether or not they'll actually get to any specifics?
So I think our don't was going out to our diverse employees saying, hey, tap your networks, we're hiring, come on in. That
Your diverse employees. What do you mean by diverse? And if that definition happens to include arbitrary characteristics of gender, race, orientation, ethnicity, etc., then you were targeting specific demographics not on the basis of skill or merit, but on arbitrary factors, which, again, walks the line of legality.
that didn't work so well.
Okay.
Oh, that didn't work so well. Okay.
And why not?
Well, first legal was like, you can't have a spiff that's any higher. Okay, yeah, I had to learn that lesson. Y'all laughing, but I had to learn.
Oh, legal got involved. Oh, spiff any higher. Yeah. I appreciate your candor that your idea treaded the line of legality.
So that didn't work. And then just we really weren't able to come back to the employee and face them and explain what happened with that referral, right? And
Right.
the amount of employees or job candidates that come through Salesforce was just too large to handle. Hey, I referred my friend Bob, what happened, right? We just couldn't serve that. And honestly, we felt like we disrespected you. We tapped your network and then you didn't feel like it paid off, right? There were hires, but not the volume to which data was on. And then we felt like the amount of time that we put into that specific effort didn't quite work.
So you came up with an initiative to diversify your hiring without first going through legal to find out if it was actually permissible to do so. And then when the results that you implicitly promised to those employees that you went to for those referrals didn't see any results from this process that you found out after the fact was not legal or would risk legality for the sake of the company, then you had to explain to them that, no, we didn't not hire Bob because he looks this way or comes from this neighborhood or something. It's that we actually fucked up. Okay.
What is working for us is really, I call a data-driven approach to equality.
Okay, a data-driven approach to equality. So we don't have enough percentage of X, so we need to hire X. Tell me how that's any different than you tapping specific employees for their networks on the basis of their being diverse.
Two things. We have a partnership with our government affairs and legal organization where we look at policy on a global basis, but communities we serve, right, where we have employees, where we might have customers, and we really try to say, what does that legislation look like? And do we have an opportunity to impact that, right? You saw that a few years ago when we acquired a company in Indianapolis and there was a Religious Freedom Act bill, and that bill was saying I could legally discriminate against folks. And we said, well, we have a customer visiting center there. We can't send customers there when they could be discriminated against. That.
Yeah, discrimination against people is what we do in our HR department.
One of them. And then the other one is how we do executive engagement is we give them a scorecard. It's not a fancy name. It's called Know Your Number Scorecard. And we basically give them the number of women, underrepresented minorities, and people of color, and attritions, hires, promotions. And they're given that data monthly via an email. And it's a dashboard, an analytic dashboard where they can see the data. And we make sure the data is next to their pipeline. So on Monday morning, when they're doing their sales call, looking at their pipeline, they also have their people analytics there. And we're also going a step further to send them a monthly email that has prompts. Do this, do that, pay attention to that. You reorged your team. Promotions are coming. Are you looking at a fair and equitable process? For more information, here's who you need to connect to.
Okay, so you explicitly have tasked your managers with putting their hiring decisions, first and foremost, through a filter of gender, race, etc., when making considerations about who to hire. So regardless of their experience, regardless of their skills, the metrics that the managers have to be aware of, first and foremost, are arbitrary characteristics of race and gender orientation, ethnicity, etc., and onward. Okay, I appreciate your candor. It took long enough, but it's an interesting admission. It's also interesting to me how legal signed off on that one.
So giving them prompts on the data and what they should do. And then they're getting this monthly, even though knowing most people's numbers aren't really moving monthly. And then on a quarterly basis, it goes up in front of our co-CEOs. And it's a conversation that's at the CEO level as well as the board level.
Great. I would love to hear in depth from all of you, but we're gonna have to do real
sorry.
lightning if we get. No, that was great to get to audience questions. So very quickly though, Michelle.
Yeah. I would just say, for us, the biggest shift has been what didn't work was a lot of the programmatic tops-down academic approach. In particular, when you're talking about thousands and thousands of employees in stores, it just wasn't netting us. I think what has changed for us is the grassroots tap into, get out of the way of our organization and have a constant, honest dialogue with the teams across the globe.
That means absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just pablum, word salad, Hallmark card greeting type language. Okay, I'm going to let this play out a little bit. We'll see if the audience questions are interesting at all. But we've only got like 7 minutes left on the video, or 6 minutes left. So we'll probably play out the rest of the entire video, and I'll comment in between, of course. I'm going to pause real quick to say hello to the chat again. Hi, guys. Thank you for listening along so far. Hello, Nighthawk, Cultist 4, Data Wasteland, Wikipedia Snippet, Renovatio, Nods, Not Nowhere, Kami hello, BG, hello, Patrice Ripley, hello, Next 6 Minutes, hello, Check Your Logic, hello, Pinkalo, hello, let's see, I think I said Sean Uli, hello, and I think that's everybody appearing in the chat. If I've missed you, Hearst Gravegear, hello, Sorsha, Sirshi, I'm always gonna screw up that name. It's you're a meme now. You're sort of like Top Ramen Lewis or Fairly Rebecca. Just it's a compliment. It's a sign of affection. Mike, forgetting your name. Mike R, hello. Totally not an NPC, hello. All right, guys. Let's see if we can finish this off. Let's see if the audience questions bring up anything that maybe myself or you have had curiosities about, because God knows I've got a lot.
Okay, Rachel.
Yeah, one thing that didn't work, we created a women's organization in our headquarters in San Francisco at my last company.
Do you have a men's organization as well? If not, why not?
And we thought, and we went and did focus groups, we thought if we did something similar in other locations, that would be good. And in New York and London, our offices felt like you've now created even more of a divide between men and women.
Gee, imagine that.
And it just fell flat. So
Interesting.
yeah.
I'll piggyback on Molly. What didn't work, we did the same thing. That definitely didn't work. What did work is, again, just that radical truthfulness, transparency, which...
Wait, what Molly said? So you went to specific employees, I'm assuming based on their diversity quotient, and tried to tap their networks for hires. You got overwhelmed and legal came in and said that wasn't a good strategy? Okay.
Showed vulnerability at the leadership level, which then created psychological safety across the company for people to speak up and share things in all hands when the format was specifically meant for you to share that. So we had people sharing these incredibly personal stories of things that they've been through, where people are crying in the company, and it was incredible to see that happen. And I think had we not been so transparent and honest about what we're trying to do to get better, then people wouldn't have felt psychologically safe to share something.
And it's great.
That sounds more like a therapy group than an effective company organization, but what do I know?
Rachel, it echoes what you said worked for you too, which is this making sure people feel heard, even if the problems aren't solved. Phyllis?
So a big problem for our organization is the fact that 90% of it is frontline workers who do not have access to computers every day as part of their work, because they're guest room attendants, valet attendants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we were depending on management team leaders, direct supervisors of work teams to try to foster inclusion through monthly messaging. And so every month we had a different diversity message that we wanted them to share.
So every month there was a passage from the Diversity and Inclusion Bible to be shared amongst the flock. I guess I'd be curious to know what some of those diversity messages were. I doubt we'll be told.
And some supervisors did it great, and some did it not at all, and some did kind of a poor job of it. So what we're trying to move to now is using technology by through a platform that can be accessed by employees on their smartphones. Everybody has a smartphone.
I don't, but that aside, so you're going to increase the amount of communicative traffic from employees, not just the managers sort of aggregating things, but now every employee can send you information all the time. Takes kind of the purpose out of having a manager, oversee their team out of the equation a little bit, doesn't it?
We don't know everybody's personal smartphone number, so we just publicize. You can go onto X app, where we call it Leo, and find out messages about this, that, or the other.
Oh, Leo, like the lion, because you're MGM. See, I got that reference.
And I think it's having a better impact.
Okay, great. It's reaching them where they are. Okay, time for a few questions, I think. Do we have microphones out there? Anyone? Oh, there's a question here. Great.
So there's been a lot of discussion around the pipeline problem and then also the unconscious bias problem. So I would love to hear how any of you have tackled those things, not just from going in and doing a training, but is there any sort of way that you've changed your process to sort of fix the pipeline problem while also addressing the bias problem?
A questioner after my own heart. Yes, tell us some specifics. What did you do? We were getting to it. We were getting a couple there, like Molly on the end started telling us about specifically what they do and the application they set up to filter by diverse metrics. Tell us some more, please.
We have something called the Salesforce interview feedback tool, SIFT. So we found that we had created a culture of, this culture fit interviewing, and that's the guy I want to have a beer with. So having the hiring manager lay out the core competencies to which they're hiring for, and then giving everyone the same kind of scorecard to fill out or questions to ask. And of course, you ask those questions however you want, but just the simple, like, here, interview my candidate was happening, right? And you just saw the job description maybe. So we put together a tool where everyone says, what are the core competencies I'm hiring for? And then we ask them to create more diverse slates, right? Look for that diversity. And then that was one of the things we wanted to do to take biases out of our interview process.
Diverse slate. So again, you have at some point in the course of your hiring process, the pipeline from interview to hire. At what point does that diversity slate filter occur? Is it right at the front? Like you're not going to interview somebody unless they meet those requirements? Or is it right before the point of deciding to hire? Because I'll tell you what, at whatever point in your process you are filtering by diversity, as far as I know, you're breaking the law.
Great.
And did you gather data around that? Did it work?
It did. I don't have the data, but it definitely worked.
One thing we did do was we mandated, and literally mandated, a diverse candidate slate policy in conjunction with a job posting policy. So every single job position in the company that's not a frontline position has to be posted, and for a certain period of time as a minimum. And in the interview process, there has to be at least one diverse candidate in among a panel of 3 candidates for every management job. And this goes up to presidents of our resorts.
Okay, so you have a specific requirement that hell or high water, you're going to have somebody amongst the candidate pool that is quote unquote diverse, which I'll remind, save for implication, no one has yet defined what that means. Except for, I suppose, our one gentleman of the group who sort of pointed himself out as a problem, being a man in management, because being a man in management is a problem. So diverse, I assume, has to, at the very least, mean female, if I'm understanding correctly.
And we have found that that has made a difference when people are actually confronted with, I shouldn't say confronted,
Was that a Freudian slip? Because you did say confronted.
presented with diverse talent.
Not confronted with, presented with diverse talent. I think you were correct in your meaning the first time around. Thank you, Chicago Mike. This panel reminds me about your video about diversity debt. Oh yes, diversity debt. Now, a very brief tangent. I'm always looking out for the next big buzzword or buzz phrase amongst stuff. You know, white fragility, toxic masculinity, stuff like that. For a long time, or at least for a brief time, I suppose, I thought diversity debt was going to take off because I saw it in the video I did that TEDx talk about, and I saw it used again in a completely different talk, not a TEDx talk, but like a little business presentation that wasn't that interesting. So I'm curious to see if diversity debt gains any traction as a buzz phrase to explain or describe, quote unquote, the problem that needs to be solved somehow.
Then there's no longer an excuse. We can't find any when they're sitting right there in front of you.
Okay, so to solve the problem of what you see as a lack of diversity, you're going to hire somebody that you deem diverse explicitly because they're diverse, regardless of whether or not their talents or skills actually commend themselves to whatever job they're going after, in order to have them confront the hiring managers that you assume have bias against that diverse aspect of that person, I guess.
And people have actually found, hey, you know, I found this great candidate and I never would have looked for that kind of person, or I never would have known of this other great talent unless I had had to go through this process.
Okay, so you have a bunch of people admitting after the fact that they are sexist or racist or whatever else, I guess.
And I would say just on the unconscious bias piece of it, one of the things that we have found valuable, so unconscious bias training as a foundation for everyone so that we're building off of a common set of language is important. What's been important for us is sort of what I call the 2.0, which is in particular, again, the product teams. We bring cross-functional teams together from all the pieces of what comes, you know, what brings product to life for us. And we do smaller sessions where they talk about how does unconscious bias show up in how we all work together? And as importantly, how we create product, right? So how we work together, what does that then end up bringing to life for products for our team or for our customers? Because we've sort of infused that into the space. So that's been a really nice sort of add for us.
Okay, this is one of those situations where I'd have to go back and re-listen to what was just said, because at first blush, nothing of what she just said made any sense.
Okay, I think I'm sorry we didn't leave time for more questions. I would love to do a whole nother panel with all of you. It's been wonderful to hear from you. But that's it, we're out of time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that is that, as it were. There's the video. Let's see if I can do this without ending the stream. Okay. Yeah, so that played out like a a multitude of various individual videos I've done in the past where an individual diversity and inclusion executive or leader is giving their sort of spiel for a promotional video or as a presentation on what they do. I like panel discussions like this because, as I said at the beginning, you get a whole slew of different people from different industries all across the board trying to define what it is that they do. Or, I guess, maybe more accurately, trying to see if they will state in public exactly what processes they use to achieve the goals that are implied through their job title. We saw a little bit of that here, specifically Molly on the end, who works for Salesforce, because Salesforce, I'm familiar with it, at least abstractly, deals a lot with business metrics and workflow and things like that. And like I said, credit where credit is due on being a little transparent, saying that, yes, we specifically have targets, quota targets based on gender, based on race, etc., that we put directly in front of managers, and we challenge them with every cycle of hiring. Are you adhering to this, dictated mix of people, not on the basis of their ability, not on the basis of their experience, not on the basis of their thought, but on the basis of arbitrary characteristics that, again, by all rights, should be something that is breaking the law. And I'm always amazed and surprised when executives in these positions say things as explicitly and blatantly as that. You usually have to drag it out of them. And sometimes they don't say it at all. They just talk in circles, like we saw in several instances here. So this video was a good sampling of what I have seen over and over and over again over the years in regards to this subject. Okay, I'm going to look at the chat real quick, see if you guys have anything you'd like to say. And then I'm going to be done because I've been talking on and off straight. And this has been a very interesting little experiment. I'm curious to know, both in the chat now and in the comments to come, hopefully from people watching this in the future, what you guys thought about this. Did you enjoy this? Given my other content, does this seem like something you'd like to see me do again in the future? Because I am open to it. But moving on, let's see. Thomas Cleaver says, missed me. Only because my aim was off? Maybe? Let's see. Let's see. Renovatio, they are being transparent because racism and sexism has become so normalized, even to a governmental level, they no longer fear or have to uphold anti-discrimination laws. It is now positive to do so. Well, is it? I mean, like the Molly lady, the Salesforce lady on the end said, they tried to do this one thing and then legal said, But again, I'm curious to know why legal hasn't said anything about having a actual app or programmatical aspect of their hiring process that has a diversity slate as part of the consideration. So yeah, no, it has become more normalized. It is insofar as saying diversity and inclusion is good. Diversity means these kind of people and not these kind of people. And like I say, I'm surprised over and over again just how normal, nonchalant, and how some, not all, but some are just, I don't know how to put it, uncareful about how they describe what they do, given the inherent implications of the legality, or illegality, I should say, of what they are proposing. Nighthawk says, I liked it a lot. Love being able to talk to you in real time while watching the video, Scribelight. Well, I appreciate that. Obviously, I didn't pay attention to the chat live as much as probably I should have. I'll try to work on that in the future, see if I can get some comments from you guys in the course of things. Let's see. Totally not an NPC. Sure, I enjoyed the stream. All right, thank you. Sean Uli, this was a good change of pace. All right, thank you. Data Wasteland, Scribelight, 2 things. Did you check your Gmail? Yes. Have you seen the gender elephant? No. Are you talking about the email where you sent me the documentary on the making of Hunt for Red October? Because I've seen that a couple of times now, I think, in the past, because I don't know what the gender elephant is. Hearst Grave Gear, it's fun watching your brain break in real time. Yeah, I mean, what you heard obviously was unscripted. But what you heard me say over the course of this video is how my mind works, and also to an extent how I script my videos as I watch them, because these are the thoughts that immediately come to my head. I want to pause the video every time there's a right. I want to pause the video every time they say something contradictory or nonsensical or whatever else, and just MST3K it, because that's, you know, sort of my pedigree. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was kind of fun doing it live, as Bill O'Reilly used to say. Let's see, Renovation. It certainly is here in Ireland, and I think you know I'm a lawyer. Legal departments across Ireland no longer fear our employment equality legislation, as government, feminism, and SOCJUS is so powerful. It seems to be just set aside, doesn't it? And I mean, if no one's willing to police that and look into it, it'll continue up until the point where the wrong person ends up getting discriminated against, and then it becomes an issue. Because it is an issue, at least in America. Ireland, I don't know all the history there, but, you know, there was this whole fight for equal rights for everyone, regardless of gender or race or orientation, that you should not be hired or measured or assessed on the basis of things you have no control over, and say nothing about who you are, but simply what you are. That's the value I was raised with. That's the notion that I grew up with as the fair and just way to approach other people in life. Now, does that mean that I don't have any biases? Does that mean that no one else has any biases who say they don't? No, because if human beings were perfect, we wouldn't need laws. We have laws there to account for the fact that human beings are fallible. We have laws there to hold an expectation to people about what we all strive to achieve as a society, not necessarily what we expect to have happen individual to individual, even though that's the hope. And it's always going to be a hope, otherwise we wouldn't need laws. But there are laws on the books about this. And the notion of filtering people for the opportunity of employment, not on the basis of what they can do, but on what they are or what they look like, we're supposed to not value that as a positive. And yet, you just saw at least 4, if not 5 people, because the lady from MGM kept talking in generalities and also gave an example that had nothing to do with diversity and inclusion and had everything to do with enriching your employees' knowledge base of company function, which, again, is not controversial in the least, or should be something that's innovative. But yeah, you know, constantly surprised. I guess my cynicism hasn't completely overtaken me, because every time I come across these things, and I've said it before, it goes back to something that I heard Christopher Hitchens say in one of his final debates or conversations about religion. I think he was on a stage with Sam Harris, and they have or at least had a similar mindset when it came to atheism, let's say, or anti-theism, depending on how you look at it. And Hitchens said this, you know, and I'm paraphrasing, but he'd say, you know, Sam and I do these things quite often, and we always come to these things with the same points and the same arguments, because that doesn't really change. You know, it's asking for proof of that which can't be proven, etc. But what makes it interesting, he said, is that when it comes to the religious, you never know what they're going to say next. And to an extent, that's why I keep coming back to diversity and inclusion, because person to person, company to company, executive to executive, I never know what they're going to say next to either explain what it is that they are doing, explain how they actually perform their jobs, or, if ever, define the problem that they are being paid to solve. So, anyway, I've gone on long enough. I want to thank everybody who came out to watch this little experiment of mine. Thanks to everybody who came out for the first attempt. That didn't go so well. This one looks like it did pretty well. Again, if you guys like this, those of you watching in the future, put a comment down there telling me what you thought about it, what I could do different, if you liked it at all, obviously. And I might consider doing something similar to this in the future. I had a lot of fun doing it. It was a lot more gratifying to be able to react instantaneously to what was going on in the video rather than stopping, writing down an entry into a script, and then having to wait a day or two before I could go record the audio and assemble and everything like that. Though I do still enjoy that, this is a bit more active and fun. Thank you, Nighthawk. Enjoyed, Scribe. Take care. You too. And guys, everybody, hope you guys have a good rest of your Sunday. Thanks for coming out again. And as always, thank you for watching.